And let me just suggest that we give hundreds of millions of dollars every year to Pakistan. I would hope that we come to our senses and, number one, treat Pakistan as it deserves to be treated by the decisions they've made that affect us. And all of their recent decisions have been contrary to America's security needs and contrary to the peace of the world. And so I would hope that we would, I would hope that if we make those decisions, that the Pakistani people themselves will understand what's going on, the repercussions of it, and start insisting on people to govern them who are more consistent with these values that we are expressing today. So I would call on my colleagues to join me in eliminating that aid that we're giving to Pakistan, at least until Dr. Afridi is set free, as a sign of good faith to us. And with that, I would recognize my good friend who is almost as outspoken as I am.
So it just is heartbreaking to think, and then Ambassador, for you to keep citing correctly the lack of education. That just breaks your heart for a country that should be doing well. Putting that in mind, Ambassador, would cooperation with the U.S. be valuable enough for Pakistan for it to consider joining the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty?
While it would be in Pakistan's interest to consider all options of joining nuclear restraint regimes, because very frankly, the pursuit of nuclear competition will not necessarily be in Pakistan's interest, I do not see that happening. The opposition to the joining the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as well as the CTBT, has been very entrenched. And so far, Pakistan's establishment, as it's called, the Pakistani military and the intelligence service, have shown no interest in encouraging participation in those restraint regimes.
And I appreciate you pointing out that it would certainly be in the interest of the people, actually be in the interest of the military, the government, whatever. Any of you or all of you, currently the Pakistani civilian nuclear program consists of 3 operational reactors, and we know that they have already entered into a 1-2-3 agreement with the Chinese. Is the nuclear energy market in Pakistan large enough to be attractive to the U.S. nuclear industry?
I'd like to take that. Most of the money that those reactors cost is financed by China. Without that financing, there would be no construction. So it's a negative market. In other words, you don't sell the reactors so much as the financing. And I don't think that's a market that, I mean, I would hesitate to speak on behalf of the industry, but I doubt they're interested in going in.
And to me, that's very unfortunate. Well, go ahead, please, Dr. Perkovich.
Just to add, Henry's right, and I think for your thinking about this too, there is no vendor other than the Chinese who would seek to build nuclear power plants in Pakistan for the reasons that Henry mentioned. They're not going to get paid. Pakistan doesn't have the money, and it's not a secure enough environment. Now, one of the problems that raises is that's why the incentive that would be offered to the Pakistanis to control their nuclear program, if it's, we'll sell you nuclear power plants, it's not really an incentive because they know they can't buy these plants either. And so it's another reason why this kind of deal won't actually work.
Well, that's disappointing because I know in my home state of South Carolina, over 60% of all electrical generation is clean, green, nuclear. And it's enabled us to compete with the rest of the world in terms of manufacturing and living standards. And I just hope that something can be done to address the extraordinary issue of reliable electrical generation for the people of Pakistan. And whatever that is, I'm happy to try to back each of you up.
Last night, or I guess 2 nights ago, one does research before they come here, I hope, and I did. So what do? You go on Google. And I plugged in USAID, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and I put in electrical generation, And what I got was really very disturbing. What you got were IG reports on all of the fraud associated with the aid that had been expropriated by the Pakistanis in ways that you couldn't even get to, well, what were we trying to do? When you got to the third page of the entry, you were able to see that USAID is trying to do a lot of sensible things, so is the Asian Bank. But it's all non-nuclear, and as I explained in the testimony, there are good reasons for that. It has to do with the expense and the availability of things like natural gas. So it's certainly something to hope for, but it certainly is not something to start with. I think that's sort of the basic point. And the good governance question overrides all economic questions there. I mean, it's quite obvious. It's just embarrassing that we have to see IG reports before you get to what USAID wants to tell you. You know, it was a whole page of them. It was very disheartening.
Well, thank you for your research. Thank you, each of you, for your insight.
Well, thank you. Joe has been, Congressman Wilson has been a wonderful person to work with over the years, and he takes this job very seriously, as we all do. And this issue today, I think, it should crystallize in our minds what we're dealing with in terms of Pakistan. Can we trust the Pakistani government to engage with us in a deal concerning nuclear power? And if we can't, which is what I'm understanding today, and which my common sense tells me, why are we then giving so much aid, providing military equipment to a government, a regime that we can't even trust to deal with a civilian electricity through nuclear energy program? We need to reassess. The time is far past when we should have made the decision. But today we need to make the decision of reassessing our strategic position with Pakistan, trying to push them in the right direction by letting them know there are consequences to bad behavior and behavior that hurts other people. And so with that said, I appreciate your testimony, the insights you've given us today. Appreciate Mr. Wilson Congressman Wilson being with us today, and of course, Judge Poe for calling this hearing. With that said, this hearing is adjourned.